Они остались в тени великого подвига, безымянные, забытые, стертые из официальных хроник защитники Брестской крепости, чье сопротивление продолжалось не дни и недели, а долгие месяцы после начала войны. История помнит героическую оборону цитадели как событие июня-июля 41 года, но архивные документы и свидетельства очевидцев говорят о другом. О людях, которые сражались до глубокой осени и даже зимы. Их имена не высечены на мемориальных досках. О них молчали десятилетиями. В казематах и подземельях, лишенные связи с внешним миром, они продолжали войну, когда фронт уже откатился на сотни километров на восток. Почему же правда о последних защитниках крепости так долго оставалась неизвестной? Что заставляло этих людей держаться, когда надежды на спасение уже не было? И как восстановить историческую справедливость спустя 80 лет после тех событий? Эти вопросы требуют ответов. Ради памяти тех, кто до последнего вздоха оставался верен присяге и Родине.
They remained in the shadow of a great feat. Nameless, forgotten, erased from official chronicles were the defenders of the Brest Fortress, whose resistance continued not for days and weeks, but for long months after the start of the war. History remembers the heroic defense of the citadel as an event of June-July of 41, but archival documents and eyewitness accounts speak of something else, of people who fought until late autumn and even winter. Their names are not carved on memorial plaques. They were silent for decades. In casemates and underground passages, cut off from the outside world, they continued the war when the front had already rolled back hundreds of kilometers to the east. Why, then, did the truth about the last defenders of the fortress remain unknown for so long? What made these people hold on when there was no hope of salvation left? And how can historical justice be restored 80 years after those events?
These questions demand answers, for the sake of the memory of those who, until their last breath, remained true to their oath and their motherland. June 1941. The Brest Fortress lives its usual life. Morning formations, combat training classes, leaves to the city. No one suspects that these peaceful days are the last. The fortress housed units of two rifle divisions, the 42nd and 6th, Border Detachment units, an NKVD regiment, and other units. In total, about 7,000 people. And together with the families of servicemen, almost 9,000. Many officers lived directly in the fortress with their wives and children. In the evenings, the sounds of a gramophone and guitar came from the open windows of the barracks. Children played Cossacks and robbers among the ancient ramparts. Young lieutenants made dates with girls at the Colm Gate. The usual life of a military garrison in a border town. Quiet and measured. No one knew that this idyll would turn into a nightmare in just a few days. The strategic importance of the Brest Fortress by the summer of 1941 was no longer what it had been in earlier times. Built back in the 19th century, it no longer met the requirements of modern warfare. Powerful walls and casemates could withstand artillery shelling, but were vulnerable to aviation and tanks. Despite this, the fortress remained an important defense hub, covering the crossings over the Bug and the Brest railway junction. The citadel was an island, surrounded by the arms of the Mukovets and Bug, with 4 fortifications along the perimeter: Kobrin, Tiraspol, Kolm, and Volin. Inside were barracks, warehouses, a hospital, and administrative buildings. Underground passages and casemates created a complex labyrinth, which would later become both a refuge and a trap for the defenders. In the last pre-war days, tension was felt in the fortress. Commanders received alarming signals, but the order not to succumb to provocations tied their hands. On June 21st, many officers let their families go to the city, to an amateur art concert. Not all of them returned to the fortress, thus escaping death. On the evening of the same day, The lights in the barracks were turned off earlier than usual. Tomorrow is Sunday, you can sleep longer. Border guards reported strange sounds and movement on the German side of the Bug, but no alarm was raised. That night, many could not sleep, as if anticipating trouble. Senior Sergeant Nikolai Gutierchik later recalled how he went out to smoke on the riverbank and saw an unusual cluster of lights on the opposite bank. Platoon Commander Lieutenant Kizhavatov sent several soldiers to check the posts on the border. They returned with a report that everything was calm. And at 4 in the morning, the silence was broken by the roar of artillery. The war began. 4 in the morning on June 22nd, 1941. A time that divided history into before and after. The first German shells rained down on the sleeping fortress without warning. The barracks, where thousands of soldiers slept, turned into a trap. The artillery strike was so sudden and powerful that many died without even waking up. The German command expected to capture the Brest Fortress in a few hours. Operation Barbarossa's plan allotted a maximum of 8 hours for this. Assault groups were supposed to quickly overcome the fortifications and move further east. But the enemy's calculations proved wrong. The first minutes after the artillery shelling were critical. Commanders tried to organize a defense, but communications were disrupted, and many officers were killed. Soldiers in their underwear, unarmed, ran out of the burning barracks into machine gun fire. The water was cut off in the very first minutes. The Germans knew that thirst would become a terrible enemy for the defenders. Lieutenant Andrei Kizhavatov, head of the border outpost, was one of the first to organize a defense near the Tiraspol Gate. The commander of the 44th Rifle Regiment, Major Pyotr Gavrilov, gathered his men in the East Fort. Regimental Commissar Efim Fomin led the defenders in the area of the Kolm Gate. Thus, the first pockets of resistance arose, unconnected but united by a common goal: not to let the enemy through. By noon on June 22nd, the fortress had turned into an archipelago of isolated islands of defense. There was no centralized command. Each group acted independently. It was this disunity that subsequently played a key role in the duration of the resistance. The Germans could not suppress all pockets simultaneously. The defenders' situation was complicated by a catastrophic shortage of everything necessary. The main ammunition depots were destroyed in the first hours of the bombing. Water became more precious than gold. To reach the river, one had to cross areas under fire. Many died trying to fill their canteens. On the first day of the war, civilians were also in the fortress, wives and children of military personnel. Attempts were made to shelter them in basements and casemates, but many died under bombs and shells. Those who survived helped the wounded, brought ammunition, and prepared food from meager supplies. By the evening of June 22nd, it became clear that help would not come. The front was rapidly retreating to the east. The fortress found itself deep behind enemy lines. But the defenders did not lay down their arms. The first inscriptions, which later became legendary, appeared on the barracks walls. Quote, "On the night of June 23rd, the defenders conducted their first sortie. A group of soldiers led by Lieutenant Vinogradov broke through to an ammunition depot and returned with cartridges and grenades. This allowed the resistance to continue. At the same time, the transition to underground communications began. Old casemates, drains, basements. The fortress went underground, becoming invulnerable to aviation and artillery. The German command was shocked by the defenders' tenacity. Reports from that day noted fanatical Russian resistance, unforeseen difficulties, and significant losses. The fortress, which they planned to take in a few hours, had turned into a bleeding wound on the body of the Blitzkrieg. In official historiography, the version that the organized defense of the Brest Fortress lasted for about a month, until the 20th of July 1941, dominated for many years. It was this version that became entrenched in history textbooks, memorial inscriptions, and public consciousness. The last defender, according to this interpretation, was Major Pyotr Gavrilov, taken prisoner on July 30th. At this date, the history of the heroic defense seemed to end. However, archival documents and eyewitness accounts paint a completely different picture. German military reports, command reports, memoirs of local residents, and testimonies of former prisoners of war indicate that individual groups of defenders continued resistance in the fortress until late autumn and even early winter of 1941. Documents of the 45th German Infantry Division, which captured Brest, contain mentions of regular skirmishes on the citadel's territory in August and September. German officer Helmut Weiss wrote in his memoirs, "Why, then, did these facts not find reflection in official history?" There are several reasons. Firstly, for a long time the very topic of the initial period of the war was painful for Soviet historiography. Recognizing the prolonged resistance of individual groups deep behind enemy lines raised an inconvenient question. Why were they not helped? Secondly, there were no living witnesses. The last defenders either died or went missing in German captivity. Another reason for the silence was the political conjuncture of the post-war years. Many surviving defenders of the fortress went through German captivity, which, in the Stalinist era, automatically made them suspicious. Some of them were repressed or discriminated against after the war. In such circumstances, their testimonies about the prolonged defense were simply not taken into account. Interestingly, German archives contain more information about the last defenders than Soviet ones. The war diary of the German garrison of Brest has entries about the, quote, "one" of the fortress's underground communications, which continued until November 1941. Cases are mentioned where Soviet soldiers made night sorties, obtained food and ammunition, and ambushed German patrols. Local residents reported hearing shots and explosions in the fortress even in December. Maria Vaschenko, who lived in the suburbs of Brest, recalled, "The Germans were afraid of the fortress even in winter. They said that Russian soldiers were still hiding there. Sometimes at night, shots were heard from there." The Eastern Fort, located in the northeastern part of the Brest Fortress, became one of the most tenacious centers of resistance. Here, under the leadership of Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov, a group formed that held out longer than all other known units. Gavrilov himself, commander of the 333rd Rifle Regiment, was an experienced military man who had fought in the Civil War. His organizational talent and personal courage played a decisive role in the prolonged defense of the fort. Initially, Gavrilov's group numbered about 400 people. Soldiers from his regiment, artillerymen, and border guards. They took up defensive positions on the very first day of the war, transforming the eastern fort into a true fortress within a fortress. 2-meter-thick walls, deep cellars, and a favorable elevated position gave the defenders an advantage. The organization of the defense was meticulously planned. Gavrilov divided the fighters into small groups, each responsible for its own section. Machine gun nests were positioned to cover all approaches to the fort. Snipers took positions on the upper levels. A first aid post was organized inside the fort, where surviving medics worked. Special attention was paid to conserving ammunition. Gavrilov introduced a strict rule: only shoot for sure, at visible targets. At night, the soldiers made sorties, collecting weapons and ammunition from the battlefield. Sometimes they managed to capture trophy weapons from the Germans. The problem with water was solved by daring nocturnal raids to the Mukovets River. Volunteers with flasks and mess kits crept through the bullet-swept territory, risking their lives for a few liters of precious moisture. Later, when the Germans established round-the-clock surveillance of the river, the fort's defenders learned to collect rainwater and condensation in the cellars. Food was more difficult. The main food warehouse burned down on the first day. The defenders ate canned food found in destroyed barracks and hardtack from emergency rations. When supplies ran out, they began to use horse meat.
Several killed artillery horses were found in the fort. Later, they switched to goosefoot and nettles growing inside the fortress. The Germans repeatedly attempted to storm the fort, but each time they were repelled, suffering losses. Then they resorted to a tactic of systematic bombing and artillery shelling. Aviation daily struck the defenders' positions. Heavy artillery destroyed the walls, but the underground casemates remained invulnerable. In early July, the Germans used chemical shells, chloropicrin, and other poisonous substances. The soldiers used homemade bandages soaked in urine. Ammonia neutralized the effect of chlorine. Many suffered burns to the lungs and eyes, but the fort continued to hold out. By mid-July, Gavrilov's group had fewer than 100 people left. Ammunition was running low, and there was practically no food left. But the defenders continued to fight, conducting nightly sorties and setting up ambushes. Their persistence earned respect even from the enemy. German reports from that period speak of the fanatical resistance of the Russians and disproportionately high losses in attempts to storm the fort. On July 23, the fort was virtually destroyed by a massive bombing. Many defenders perished under the rubble. The remaining ones split into small groups and continued resistance in different parts of the fortress. Gavrilov himself, with a few soldiers, took refuge in an underground casemate, from where he continued to make sorties for another whole week. The catacombs and underground communications of the Brest Fortress became the last refuge, and at the same time, a weapon for those who continued to resist after the defeat of the main forces. This labyrinth of tunnels, casemates, and basements, created in the 19th century, turned into an invisible front where Soviet soldiers waged their underground war for months after the official capture of the fortress. The unique architecture of the citadel included a developed network of underground passages connecting the main fortifications. Initially, these communications were intended for the safe movement of the garrison and the storage of ammunition and provisions. No one imagined that they would become the last stronghold of defense in an unequal struggle. The depth of some casemates reached 5 to 7 meters underground. The thickness of the vaults was up to 2 meters of monolithic brick and concrete. Such ceilings could withstand direct hits from aerial bombs. The ventilation shaft system ensured an airflow even with a complete blockade of ground exits. After the massive bombardments of June-July, when most of the ground fortifications were destroyed, the surviving defenders moved underground. They used their knowledge of underground topography as a strategic advantage. German soldiers, who did not have accurate plans of the underground, were afraid to venture into the dark corridors, where at any moment a shot from an invisible defender could ring out. In August 1941, the German command considered the fortress completely captured. Regular patrols inspected the territory, and economic services of the occupying forces were stationed in the ruins. But at night, the fortress came alive. Groups of soldiers emerged from the underground to obtain water, food, and ammunition. One such group was commanded by Sergeant Ivan Melnikov. 8 men from his unit were hiding in an underground casemate between the Kobrin and Volyn fortifications. During the day, they waited in complete darkness, conserving their strength and meager supplies. At nightfall, they surfaced. The soldiers collected rainwater, found canned goods and cartridges in destroyed warehouses, and sometimes ambushed German patrols. Survival in the underground required special skills and ingenuity. The defenders learned to navigate in absolute darkness, memorizing the number of steps between turns and branches. For lighting, they used makeshift torches made of fabric soaked in fuel, but they lit them extremely rarely. The smoke could give away their location. Drinking water was collected from condensation on the walls or obtained during night sorties. Underground passages leading to the river were especially valued. Some of them, flooded or semi-flooded, allowed for discreet access to water. An old drain in the area of the Tiraspol Gate became a real salvation for Lieutenant Akimochkin's group. Through it, The soldiers not only obtained water, but also carried out raids into the city, gathering information and medicine. The underground also created serious problems for the defenders. Dampness and cold caused illnesses. Many suffered from tuberculosis, pneumonia, and rheumatism. The lack of sunlight led to avitaminosis and scurvy. The wounded died from blood poisoning. In the darkness and unsanitary conditions, it was impossible to provide proper care. The German command, realizing the ongoing resistance, repeatedly tried to clear the underground. Special assault groups with flamethrowers, smoke bombs, and service dogs were used. In September 1941, the Germans used water pumping from the Mukavets and flooded the lower levels of the underground. Many defenders died, but some managed to move to higher levels. In late September, the occupiers tried to use poisonous gases, pumping them through ventilation shafts. This tactic led to the death of several resistance groups, but far from all. The underground labyrinth proved to be too complex. Somewhere the gas dispersed without reaching the deep casemates. Somewhere the defenders managed to block the ventilation channels and isolate their shelters. The history of war always remembers commanders and famous heroes, but often forgets the ordinary soldiers, those who fulfilled their duty to the end without hope of glory or recognition. The Brest Fortress preserves the memory of many such nameless heroes, whose names remained in the shadow of official history for decades. Only the painstaking work of researchers, searchers, and archivists has made it possible to restore some forgotten pages and bring back from oblivion the names of the last defenders of the citadel. Sergeant Roman Semenyuk is one such name. The commander of a machine gun crew of the 184th Regiment, he continued to resist until mid-August. His group of 5 men held the defense in the basement of a barracks near the Kolm Gate. A record in the diary of German officer Wilhelm Reiner has been preserved. On August 16th, during an inspection of the ruins, a group of Russians was discovered. 4 were killed during apprehension. 1 shot himself. Documents in the name of Semenyuk were found on the senior one. This fact is also confirmed by the testimony of local resident Anna Novitskaya, who saw the Germans carrying bodies out of the fortress that day. Among other established names is Senior Sergeant Ivan Bondarchuk. A former border guard, he led a group of 7 men who held positions in the dungeon of the Kobrin fortification until September. They were discovered by chance when German sappers were carrying out demining work. A battle ensued, in which all the defenders perished. German sapper Kurt Schoenfeld wrote in his memoirs, "These Russians looked like skeletons covered in skin, but they fought like devils. The last one, already wounded, blew himself up with a grenade when we tried to take him alive." A locket with a photograph of his wife and child was found on Bondarchuk, by which his identity was later established. A special place in the history of the last defenders is occupied by the group of Lieutenant Alexei Naganov. A graduate of the infantry school, 23-year-old Naganov commanded a platoon in the 333rd Rifle Regiment. In the first days of the war, he was wounded, but continued to lead the defense. When the main forces were defeated, Naganov and 12 soldiers took refuge in the underground casemate of the eastern fort. They made daring sorties, attacking German patrols and obtaining food. In October, the group was discovered. In an unequal battle, everyone died except for the seriously wounded private Stepan Gerasimov, who was captured and survived in a concentration camp. After the war, it was his testimony that helped restore the history of Naganov's group. Among the last defenders were not only military personnel but also civilians. Nurse Anna Kravchenko remained in the hospital basement until September, caring for the wounded. When medicines ran out, she used folk remedies, herbal decoctions collected on the fortress grounds. The Germans discovered the hospital in mid-September. The wounded were shot, and Anna was sent to a concentration camp. Miraculously surviving, after the war she testified about the last days of the defense. German archives became an important source of information about the last defenders. The documents of the Brest Commandant's office contain detailed reports on the cleansing of the fortress in August-October of 41.
According to this data, in September alone, 11 resistance groups totaling about 50 people were discovered and destroyed in the dungeons. The Combat Loss Journal records cases of German soldiers dying at the hands of the fortress defenders right up until November. Search expeditions that worked in the fortress since the 60s made a significant contribution to restoring the names of the heroes. During excavations, the remains of soldiers with lockets, personal belongings, and documents were found. In the underground casemate of the Tiraspol fortification, inscriptions scratched on the walls were found. There were 12 of us. I am the only one left. No water. Farewell, motherland. September 41st. Sergeant Sidorov. Forensic examination confirmed that the inscription was made at the specified time. According to archival data, it was established that Sergeant Mikhail Sidorov from the 184th Rifle Regiment served in the fortress. The testimonies of local residents also helped to restore some names. Maria Vashchenko, who lived near the fortress, recalled, "In October, a soldier knocked on our door at night, all ragged, dirty, barely standing. He called himself Nikolai Ivanov, said he was from the fortress. We fed him, gave him civilian clothes. In the morning he left towards the forest, wanting to get to the partisans. We never saw him again." Many names remained unknown. During excavations in different parts of the fortress, the remains of soldiers without documents or identification marks were found. Some of them, judging by the position of the skeletons and the weapons found, continued to resist until the last bullet. These nameless heroes now rest in a mass grave near the walls of the fortress they defended with their lives. Survival under siege demanded not only military prowess, but also incredible ingenuity from the last defenders of the Brest Fortress. Every day was a battle not only against the enemy, but also against hunger, thirst, and disease. The tactics they developed became a unique example of guerrilla warfare under conditions of complete blockade. First and foremost, the defenders divided into small, autonomous groups of 5 to 7 people. Such detachments could operate independently, which made them invulnerable. The destruction of one group did not affect the combat readiness of others. Commanders were those who displayed not only bravery, but also quick wit. Sergeants, junior lieutenants, sometimes even privates with combat experience. The system of underground communications became the basis of survival. Each group controlled its section of the underground, knowing all the passages and exits. The fighters drew primitive maps, marking safe routes and enemy ambush locations. To navigate in the dark, they used ropes stretched along the walls and notches on the brickwork. Obtaining water was a top priority. When the Germans cut off access to the river, the defenders found alternative sources. Old wells were discovered in the underground passages, which even German engineers with fortress plans did not know about. Where there were no wells, they collected condensate from the walls using rags and makeshift gutters made from tree bark. After rain, they went to the surface to collect water from puddles and shell craters. Food was more difficult. Initially, they subsisted on supplies from destroyed warehouses and barracks. When these ran out, they began to use everything they could find, from grass to leather belts. Lieutenant Karasev's group discovered a supply of medical alcohol in the hospital basement, which they diluted with water and used for disinfection and to maintain strength. Night raids were distinguished by particular skill. Groups of 2 or 3 people were chosen, moving only on moonless nights. The main target was German food warehouses located in the city. They made their way through underground passages extending beyond the fortress, or swam across the river. They acted silently, knives instead of firearms, rags on their shoes for noiseless movement. For combat operations, a special tactic was developed. They never attacked large enemy units, choosing single sentries or small patrols as targets.
They used makeshift silencers made from bottles and rags to avoid attracting attention. After each operation, they changed their location, confusing their pursuers in the labyrinth of underground passages. Communication between groups was maintained using conditional signs left on the walls, simple symbols understood only by their own. Sometimes short meetings of commanders were arranged to coordinate actions.
The place and time of the meeting were determined in advance, using sunbeams penetrating through openings in the vaults as natural clocks. Weapons were obtained in battles or found at the sites of previous engagements. Compact pistols and grenades were especially valued. From improvised materials, primitive bombs were made. Tin cans filled with gunpowder from cartridges, with homemade fuses. Folk remedies were used to treat wounds. Bandages were made from underwear. Wounds were disinfected with alcohol or moonshine obtained from local residents. Instead of iodine, a strong decoction of oak bark was used. And instead of pain relievers, a homemade tincture of poppy growing on the ruins. Camouflage became a special art. The fighters learned to move in such a way as not to attract attention even during the day. Clothes were soiled with earth and ash for camouflage. Faces and hands were covered with soot. They moved primarily by crawling, using shell craters and ruins as cover. The Germans tried to combat these ghosts of the fortress in various ways. They used service dogs, which the defenders repelled with rags soaked in kerosene. They released poison gas into the underground passages, from which they escaped by closing the entrances with wet rags and hiding in deep casemates, where the air remained clean. German military archives hold astonishing evidence of what was officially considered impossible. Documents compiled by meticulous Wehrmacht officers reveal a truth hidden from Soviet citizens for decades. The resistance in the Brest Fortress did not cease in July 1941. It continued for months, becoming a bleeding wound on the body of the German rear. A report from General Schlieper, commander of the 405th Infantry Division, dated August 24, 41, notes, "Despite complete encirclement and methodical clearing, isolated groups of Russians continue to offer resistance in the underground structures of the citadel. Over the past week, 17 men have been killed and 23 wounded during operations to eliminate these groups." The diary of Oberleutnant Karl Weiss, who served in the Brest Commandant's office, contains entries dated September. Quote, "An especially valuable source was the memoirs of military Dr. Heinz Schmidt, published in West Germany in 1960. He wrote, quote, German documents also allow an assessment of the scale of losses inflicted by the defenders on the enemy. According to the war diary of the 131st Infantry Division, 86 men were killed and over 100 wounded during the, quote, of the fortress's underground passages in August-September alone. For comparison, the division suffered such losses in full-scale frontal battles. An important piece of evidence was the report of the SS Sonderkommando, sent to Brest in October 41 specifically to combat the fortress defenders. It states, "Fanatics hiding in the underground passages pose a threat to rear communications. They carry out sabotage, attack warehouses and transport. Over the past month, 23 cases of attacks on Wehrmacht soldiers and 6 vehicle bombings have been recorded." For the German command, the prolonged resistance in the fortress became a serious problem, not only militarily, but also propagandistically. A directive from the Propaganda Department of Army Group Center, dated October 3, 41, prescribed, "Avoid mentioning the continuing Russian resistance in the Brest Fortress in press and radio reports. These facts could be used by enemy propaganda and negatively affect the morale of the Reich's population." Especially telling are the recollections of German soldiers about the psychological impact that the ghosts of the fortress had on them. Gefreiter Willi Hoffmann wrote in a letter home, "The worst are the night sorties of the Russians. They appear out of nowhere, silently, like shadows. They kill sentries and disappear. Many of our guys are afraid to stand guard near the fortress. They say that the dead are still fighting there." It is indicative that the German command was forced to keep a significant garrison in Brest, diverting forces from the front. In October 1941, when the fate of Moscow was being decided, a reinforced infantry battalion, an SS company, and auxiliary units, a total of about 1,000 men, were located in the city and fortress. These troops could have been used on the front line, but instead, they were fighting a handful of surrounded defenders. August of 41. According to official history, by this time organized resistance in the Brest Fortress had already ceased. The front had rolled back far to the east. German tank columns were rushing towards Moscow, but shots still echoed in the ruins of the citadel. German documents, kept in archives for many years, contain astonishing evidence. On August 10th, during engineering work in the eastern part of the fortress, a group of Russians offered armed resistance. 3 German soldiers were killed, 2 wounded. The Russians hid in the underground communications. This report from the commander of the engineering company testifies that fighting in the fortress continued in August. Who were these people? How did they manage to survive and fight when, it seemed, all was lost? One such group was commanded by Senior Lieutenant Viktor Semenov. His detachment consisted of 8 men, 4 border guards, and 4 rifle regiment soldiers. They took refuge in an underground casemate near the Tiraspol gate. At night, they went out for water, collected weapons and ammunition from the battlefield. Sometimes they made daring sorties into the city, obtaining food and medicine. On August 15th, they attacked a German patrol, seizing weapons and documents. In response, the German command sent a reinforced company into the fortress with the order to finally eliminate the pockets of resistance. An unequal battle ensued. Semenov and 6 of his men died, covering the retreat of 2 wounded comrades. They managed to escape through an underground passage leading to the river and subsequently joined the partisans. Thanks to their testimonies, we know about this episode. In another part of the fortress, in the casemates of the Kobrin fortification, a group led by Sergeant Pavel Borovsky held out. 12 people, including 2 nurses. They had established a life underground. A hospital, an ammunition depot, and a rainwater collection system were set up. The group operated so effectively that the Germans estimated their numbers to be much larger. German documents refer to a band of Russians numbering up to 50 people, hiding in the northern part of the citadel. On August 23rd, the Germans discovered their hideout. After hours of fighting, only 3 remained alive: Borovsky himself and 2 nurses. The wounded sergeant ordered the women to leave through an emergency exit, while he stayed to cover their retreat. The Germans found his body among dozens of spent cartridges. He fought to the last bullet. Both nurses were captured while attempting to swim across the Mukavets. They were interrogated by the Gestapo, tortured, but they did not reveal the location of other resistance groups. Both were shot on August 25th. Why were these facts ignored by official historiography for so long? There are several reasons. Firstly, the Soviet command did not have reliable information about the ongoing resistance. Communication with the fortress was cut off in the first days of the war. Secondly, acknowledging a prolonged defense raised an uncomfortable question. Why were the defenders not helped? Thirdly, many surviving participants of those events were captured and repressed after the war. Their testimonies were considered unreliable. Finally, a certain canonical version of the defense of the Brest Fortress had been established, and any deviations from it were perceived as an attempt on sacred memory. Meanwhile, the August battles in the fortress were no less heroic than the June ones. The defenders acted under conditions of complete blockade, without hope of help, knowing that there was practically no chance of survival. They switched to guerrilla tactics: sudden strikes, ambushes, sabotage. The German command was forced to keep significant forces in the fortress area, diverting them from the front. In late August, the Germans employed a new tactic to combat the defenders. Special teams with flamethrowers and smoke grenades systematically burned out the underground passages. Service dogs were used to search for hiding places. Local residents, who knew the location of the underground passages, were involved in the search for the defenders. Some, under threat of execution, agreed to help the occupiers, but many sabotaged orders, deliberately pointing in false directions. German archives contain a report from August 30th. Over the past week, 4 groups of Russians, totaling about 30 people, have been eliminated in the fortress. Our losses amounted to 7 killed and 11 wounded. Presumably, 2 or 3 more groups remain in the underground passages. This document clearly shows the scale of resistance even 2 months after the start of the war. One of the last episodes of the August battles was the story of Lieutenant Nikolai Sokolov's group. 15 soldiers under his command controlled the system of underground passages between the Kolm and Tiraspol gates. They had a radio station, but due to damage, it only worked for reception. Thanks to this, the defenders knew about the situation on the fronts and understood that help would not come from anywhere. Nevertheless, they continued the fight, seeing their task as diverting enemy forces. On August 31st, Sokolov's group made its last sortie. They attacked a German ammunition depot. They managed to blow it up, destroying a significant amount of shells and mines. But on the way back, the group was discovered and surrounded. All died in an unequal battle, including Sokolov himself. The German officer who led the operation to eliminate the group wrote in his diary, "These Russians fought with incredible stubbornness. The last one, already wounded, blew himself and several of our soldiers up with a grenade. Such self-sacrifice commands respect even from the enemy." By September 1941, the Brest Fortress presented a grim spectacle. The once majestic walls had turned into ruins, riddled with shells and bombs. Barracks lay in rubble. Squares were pockmarked with craters. The German command considered the fortress definitively conquered and used its territory for logistical needs. But when night fell, the citadel came alive. Shadows emerged from the dungeons, continuing an invisible war. The physical condition of the last defenders was appalling. Exhausted, overgrown, in rags, they resembled ghosts. Many suffered from scurvy and avitaminosis. Their skin had taken on an earthy hue from constant darkness. Wounds festered, not healing for months. The weight of some soldiers dropped to 40 kilograms. They had turned into living skeletons. German Dr. Kurt Schneider, who examined a captured defender at the end of September, wrote in his diary, "The patient is in a state of extreme exhaustion. Signs of prolonged starvation, dehydration, and avitaminosis are visible. It is surprising that he is still able to hold a weapon, but physical deprivations did not break their spirit of resistance. On the contrary, the psychological state of the remaining defenders was characterized by a special determination. They had crossed the line where the fear of death no longer held sway. The realization of their hopeless situation did not paralyze them, but gave them strength. They had nothing left to lose. In the autumn, the nature of the resistance changed. If in June-July, the defenders still hoped for the fortress to be relieved and engaged in relatively open battles, now they resorted to tactics of invisible warfare. They attacked only at night, avoided direct clashes, and used cold weapons instead of firearms to avoid revealing their positions. One such group was commanded by Sergeant Major Ivan Melnikov. The 6 men of his squad turned into true ghosts of the fortress. During the day, they hid in an underground casemate, and at night they went hunting. German sentries disappeared without a trace. Warehouses caught fire from unknown causes. Cars were blown up by booby traps. In his last letter, found after the war in a hiding place, Melnikov wrote, "We know we are doomed, but every day of our lives costs the Germans blood. As long as we live, the fortress is not conquered." By mid-September, the German command was forced to acknowledge the seriousness of the problem. A special SS team was sent to Brest to combat the underground partisans. Systematic raids began, using dogs, smoke bombs, and flamethrowers. The dungeons were flooded with water, and poisonous gases were pumped in. On September 23rd, one of the last major clashes occurred. Lieutenant Akimochkin's group attacked the German headquarters, located in a surviving commandant's office building. They managed to eliminate several officers and seize documents, but not all were able to escape. Akimochkin himself and 3 soldiers died covering their comrades' retreat. In October, only a few continued the resistance. Groups broke up into individual fighters, each waging their own war. They became solitary ghosts, moving through the labyrinth of dungeons. Their appearances on the surface became rarer, but did not stop completely. German Corporal Hans Müller recalled, "We were afraid of night duty in the fortress. The Russians appeared from nowhere, silently like shadows. One day I found my partner with his throat cut, and next to him an inscription on the wall, 'Death to the Fascists.'" By the end of October, weather conditions complicated the situation for the last defenders. Rains began, flooding the dungeons. The temperature dropped below zero, and there were no warm clothes. Obtaining food became increasingly difficult. The Germans intensified warehouse security and territory patrols. The last known defender of the fortress was Sergeant Roman Semenyuk. He was discovered and captured on November 7th, the day a historic parade was held in Moscow. Exhausted, with frostbitten limbs, he still retained his combat capability and resisted capture. During interrogation, he refused to answer questions and soon died from his wounds. Thus ended the autumn agony of the Brest Fortress, the last island of resistance in a territory the enemy considered long conquered. These people fought without hope of victory or salvation, driven only by a sense of duty and hatred for the enemy. Their feet remained in the shadow of official history, but it is precisely such nameless heroes who constitute the true greatness of a people in times of trial. By the end of autumn 1941, the Brest Fortress was a realm of shadows. Ruined walls, collapsed vaults, scorched earth. It seemed that nothing living could exist here. The German command officially reported the complete suppression of resistance back in July. But even in November, when the first snow covered the ruins, life still flickered deep within the dungeons, and an invisible war continued. By this time, the last defenders of the fortress no longer represented an organized force. They acted alone or in small groups of 2 or 3 people, unconnected to each other. Each such pocket of resistance was an autonomous island of struggle, the last flicker of a dying flame. German Feldwebel Otto Schulz recorded in his diary, November 5th, shots again in the eastern part of the fortress. We still can't smoke these Russians out of the cellars. Just when we think it's over, they remind us of themselves again. The command is furious. For the 3rd month, we can't report a complete clearing of the area. Winter cold became more terrifying to the defenders than the enemy. In the frozen casemates, the temperature dropped below zero. The soldiers had no warm clothing. Many wore rags, wrapping their feet in cloths. Frostbite became commonplace. Colds and pneumonia claimed the lives of those whom German bullets could not kill. Water turned into ice, and obtaining it became a real ordeal. The defenders melted snow, collected ice from the walls. Food was almost gone. The last canned goods had been eaten in October. Now rats, tree bark, and old leather ammunition soaked in water served as sustenance. But even in such inhumane conditions, the resistance continued. Sergeant Dmitry Volkov and 2 of his comrades organized a real hunt for German signalmen. They cut telephone cables, disrupting communication between garrison units. When the Germans sent repair teams, the soldiers set ambushes. According to German data, in November alone, 6 signal soldiers were killed in this manner. During the interrogation of captured Red Army soldier Stepan Gerasimov, seized on November 12th, the Germans learned about the existence of several ammunition caches created back in the summer. This explained why the defenders still had the ability to fire. Gerasimov, in an extreme state of exhaustion, said that only 3 people remained in his group, 2 of whom were wounded. "We understood that we were doomed," he later said in the prisoner of war camp. "But we weren't going to surrender." The commander said, "As long as at least one of us is alive, the fortress has not fallen." On November 20th, the German command launched Operation Winter Cleaning, the last large-scale attempt to completely suppress resistance in the fortress. Special assault groups with flamethrowers and explosives methodically examined every basement, every crevice. Underground passages were flooded with icy water or filled with smoke. Entrances and exits from the casemates were blocked or mined. During these days, the last organized groups of defenders perished. Lieutenant Akimov and 4 of his soldiers were discovered in a casemate near the Kolm Gate. After a brief fight, having exhausted all their ammunition, they blew themselves up with their last grenade. The group of Senior Sergeant Novikov, defending the dungeon in the area of the Kobrin fortification, died in an attempt to break through. The soldiers wanted to leave the fortress and join the partisans. By early December, only individual fighters remained in the fortress, having lost contact with each other. Their exact number is impossible to ascertain. German documents speak of isolated snipers who still posed a danger to patrols. The last recorded instance of armed resistance dates back to December 23, 1941, when an unknown defender of the fortress shot a German officer near the Tiraspol Gate. The fate of the last defenders of the Brest Fortress in most cases remained unknown. Some died in battles, some froze in the icy dungeons. Some died of hunger and disease. A few were captured, where they endured the trials of concentration camps. Only a handful lived to see liberation and were able to tell about the heroism of their comrades. After the war, during excavations in the fortress dungeons, the remains of soldiers with weapons in their hands were found. On the walls of the casemates, archaeologists discovered the last messages of the defenders, inscriptions scratched with a bayonet. "We die, but we do not surrender. There were 5 of us, only 1 remains. Farewell, motherland, December 41st. Thus, the flame of resistance in the Brest Fortress faded. Not immediately, not in July, as official history claimed, but gradually, over months, with the last tremor of departing life. These people fought not for glory or awards. They already knew that, most likely, no one would ever know about them. They fought because they could not do otherwise. The history of the defense of the Brest Fortress remained incomplete for decades. The truth about the last defenders, who held out for months after the official end of the defense, broke through the thick of time with enormous difficulty. It was a long road from oblivion to recognition, from silence to historical justice. The first guardians of memory were the local residents of Brest. During the occupation, they secretly observed what was happening in the fortress, heard shots and explosions for many months after the resistance had officially ceased, according to official reports. Anna Kovalchuk, who lived in the suburbs, recounted, "The Germans were afraid to go into the fortress even in autumn. They said that Russian soldiers were still shooting there. We heard shots at night until December of '41. These oral testimonies were passed down from mouth to mouth, preserving the memory of the feat when official history remained silent about it. After the liberation of Brest in '44, local residents told Soviet officers about the prolonged defense, but their testimonies were often met with skepticism. The possibility of resistance deep in the enemy's rear for months seemed too incredible. Former prisoners of war, defenders of the fortress who had gone through German camps, played a huge role in preserving the truth. Sergeant Stepan Gerasimov, captured by the Germans in November '41, tried to tell about the last months of the defense after his liberation from captivity.
But in the atmosphere of post-war distrust of former prisoners, his testimonies long remained unheeded. "They didn't believe us," he later recalled. "They thought we were exaggerating to justify our captivity." Sergei Smirnov was the first professional historian to draw attention to the duration of the resistance. In the 50s, he began collecting testimonies about the defense of the fortress, meeting with surviving participants. His book, Brest Fortress, lifted the veil of secrecy, although even he did not dare to openly write about resistance that continued until winter. Censorship restrictions and political expediency did not allow the whole truth to be told. One of the key pieces of evidence came from German archival documents captured by Soviet troops. War diaries, commanders' reports, loss reports, all these materials contained mentions of ongoing resistance in the fortress until December 41. But access to these documents was limited. Many of them remained classified until the 80s. Memoirs of German officers and soldiers published in West Germany became an important source of information. Unbound by Soviet censorship, they described the prolonged struggle with the, quote, "one" of the Brest Fortress. These testimonies gradually became known to Soviet historians through translations and international contacts. Archaeological excavations in the fortress, which began in the 60s, played a huge role in restoring the truth. During the exploration of the underground passages, the remains of soldiers with weapons in hand, personal belongings, and inscriptions on the walls dated to the autumn and winter of 41 were discovered. These material evidences were difficult to ignore. Gradually, the truth began to break through into official historiography. First in specialized scientific works, then in memorial museum exhibitions, finally in school textbooks and popular literature. Each step was difficult, meeting resistance from the conservative part of the historical community, accustomed to the canonical version of the defense. The staff of the memorial complex played a special role in preserving memory. Many of them, unable to openly speak about the duration of the resistance, conveyed this information in unofficial conversations with visitors, especially with young people. Guides, going beyond the approved texts, spoke about inscriptions in the underground passages dated to autumn, about the discovered personal belongings of the last defenders. Only during the years of perestroika did it become possible to openly talk about all aspects of the fortress's defense. Many archival documents were declassified, and previously forbidden memoirs of participants in the events were published. The history of the last defenders of the fortress finally became part of the official historiography of the Great Patriotic War. Recent decades have opened a new chapter in the history of the defense of Brest Fortress. Archaeological excavations, declassified archives, and the painstaking work of search parties have made it possible to reconstruct the true picture of resistance, which continued much longer than previously believed. Each find, each document, becomes further evidence of the unparalleled courage of the last defenders of the citadel. In 2005, an expedition from the Institute of Archaeology discovered the remains of 3 combatants with weapons in hand in an underground casemate of the Kobrin fortification. Nearby were empty shell casings, a pierced helmet, a mess tin, and a flask. Analysis showed that these individuals died in October-November 1941, several months after the officially recognized end of the defense. An inscription was found on the casemate wall. "There were 8 of us. 3 remain. No water. Ammunition is running out. We will die, but we will not surrender." October 41. Radiocarbon dating and other modern dating methods confirmed the authenticity of the find. This material evidence became irrefutable proof of prolonged resistance. One of the deceased had preserved a medallion with his details. Stepan Ivanovich Gerasimov, a Red Army soldier of the 184th Rifle Regiment. His name is now immortalized on a memorial plaque. Archival research proved equally important. Documents from the German command,
captured by Soviet troops during their offensive, were discovered and declassified in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense. The war diaries of the German garrison in Brest contain regular mentions of clashes with the fortress defenders up until December 1941. A report from the city commandant dated October 28 states, "Despite all measures taken, individual groups of Russians are still hiding in the fortress's underground passages, carrying out sabotage sorties. Over the past week, 3 soldiers have died at their hands. Additional forces are required for the final clearing of the area." Historian Alexei Nikonov, who worked with these documents, notes, "The German military were meticulous in their record-keeping. If they recorded clashes in the fortress in the autumn and winter of 41, then they truly occurred. These documents were not intended for propaganda. They were internal reports. An important source of information came from the memoirs of local residents, collected as part of the Living Memory Project. Dozens of witnesses to those events recounted hearing shots and explosions in the fortress for many months after its official fall. Maria Vashchenko, who was 15 in 41, recalled, "The Germans were afraid to go into the fortress even in November. They said that Russian soldiers were still hiding there. We heard gunshots at night until the first snows. Search operations, conducted annually in the fortress, continue to yield new finds." In 2018, personal belongings of soldiers, dated to the autumn of 41, were discovered in an underground collector between the Cahom and Tiraspol gates. A cartridge belt with ammunition, a gas mask, fragments of uniforms, and a mess tin with the scratched date September 41. Especially valuable were the found fragments of an unknown defender's diary. Several charred pages contained entries dated September and October. One of them read, "September 20th, 4 of us remain. There is water, but ammunition is running out. The Germans are walking above, but they don't venture into the underground. Yesterday, Petrovich shot one of their officers. Today they bombed all day, but it's safe down here, underground." These finds allowed for the reconstruction of the lives of the last defenders. They created caches of ammunition and provisions, equipped hidden observation posts, and developed a system of signals and conventional signs. Improvised lamps made from shell casings, devices for collecting rainwater, and primitive stoves for heating and cooking were discovered in the underground passages. Modern research methods allowed for the analysis of inscriptions on the fortress walls. With special equipment, it was possible to read even those that had been painted over or faded with time. Many of them are dated September, October, and even November 41. Holding on. Ammunition available. Little water. October 41. Lieutenant Akimochkin. Dying but not surrendering. Farewell, Motherland. November 41. An additional source of information came from German military archives, which became accessible after the reunification of Germany. Wehrmacht documents contain numerous mentions of continued resistance in the Brest Fortress. The combat casualty log of the 405th Infantry Division recorded instances of German soldiers dying at the hands of the fortress defenders up until December 1941. These studies not only confirmed the fact of prolonged resistance, but also helped restore the names of many heroes. The Memorial Complex's exhibition now includes a special section dedicated to the last defenders of the fortress. It features their personal belongings, photographs, and documents. Visitors can see a map of the underground communications with marked locations of the last pockets of resistance. Chapter 15. Epilogue: Restoring Historical Justice. The history of the Brest Fortress is not merely an episode of war. It is a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, an example of how, even in the most hopeless conditions, people are capable of resisting evil. For many years, we knew only part of the truth about the heroic defense in the first weeks of the war. But now, with new facts emerging about the last defenders who held out for months after the assault, our understanding of those events becomes fuller and deeper. Why is it so important to restore historical justice? Because each of these fighters deserves to have their heroic deed recognized and immortalized. Those who fought in the fortress's underground passages until late autumn and winter of 41 did so not for glory or awards. They knew that most likely no one would ever know about them. But they continued the struggle because they could not do otherwise. The history of the last defenders of the Brest Fortress forces us to reevaluate the initial period of the war. Traditionally, it was described as a time of defeats and retreats. But now we see that even in the darkest days, when the enemy was pushing towards Moscow, the struggle continued deep in its rear. Individuals and small groups, cut off from the main forces, without communication or support, continued to resist. This is not just heroism. It is a manifestation of the indomitable will of a people who refuse to accept defeat. For modern generations, the history of the last defenders of the Brest Fortress is a lesson in courage and fidelity to duty. In an era where values are often blurred and the concept of heroism devalued, these people provide an example of true self-sacrifice. They fought not for public acclaim, not for glory, but because they considered it their duty to their homeland. Restoring the historical truth about the prolonged defense of the fortress is also important for understanding the scale of the tragedy of war. We are used to thinking in large numbers, divisions, armies, fronts. But war is, first and foremost, the fates of individual people. Each of the last defenders of the fortress is a person with their own history, hopes, dreams. All of this was obliterated by the war, but it did not break their spirit. Today, the Brest Fortress Memorial Complex includes materials about the prolonged resistance in its exhibition. Visitors can see personal belongings of the last defenders found during excavations, read their inscriptions on the walls, and learn the names of those who have been identified. This is an important step towards restoring historical justice. But the work continues. Search teams work annually on the fortress grounds, finding new evidence of resistance. Historians study archives, compare documents, and reconstruct the chronology of events. Every new find, every discovered document is another step towards a complete and reliable picture of the defense. For future generations, it is important to preserve not only the facts, but also the spirit of this resistance. To understand what motivated people who continued to fight when, it seemed, all was lost. This was not fanaticism or blind obedience to orders. It was a conscious choice of people for whom the concepts of honor and duty were not empty words. The history of the last defenders of the Brest Fortress teaches us another important thing: never give up. Even when the situation seems hopeless, even when the enemy vastly outnumbers forces, there is always the possibility of resistance. These people showed that spirit is not measured by the quantity of weapons or the number of troops. Restoring historical justice is our duty to those who gave their lives for the motherland. As long as we remember their heroic deed, they continue to live in our memory. And as long as this memory lives, so does the spirit of resistance that helped our people endure the most terrible war of the 20th century.